Folks, thank you. I think this is a little bit background. First meetup, Descope is I would call startup in stealth. Ashish joined us. We're going to go through formal introduction a little bit later. But I think this is the series of startups. At Demisto, before Slavik and I started Demisto, we did a lot of meetups. And my goal with these meetups is one, to learn, because as we do these series of meetups is talk to people, use cases come up, and these chats you'll see is not at all focused on our product. We'll pick a theme, which in this case it's user onboarding, leverage Ashish's expertise and past experiences on user onboarding. We're going to talk about that. Make it interactive. We'll go through and ask questions. We are recording it. Just FYI, I think it's good to capture this, and I think there's multiple purposes we capture this. I think usually from a marketing perspective, we edit and stream very clean, but again, this is learning. Our engineering team is in Tel Aviv. They hear this, they learn from this. I remember in Demisto days, we used to look back, says, hey, what was the discussion? Again, mostly focused on problem, domain, what we are doing, topic focused. So that's kind of the backdrop of the meetup. But Ashish, let's start with a quick intro about you. I'll introduce myself and then we'll dive into the topic.
Sounds good. So I am Ashish Aggarwal. I am the co-founder and CTO for a startup called Productiv. We are a B2B SaaS company. I won't go too much into that. A brief, history. Rishi and I actually went to undergrad together. We were in the same dorm. So we know each other well from those days.
97, huh?
Yeah, yes. Maybe. Shows our age.
It shows our age.
Yeah. I was going to claim 2017, but that's okay.
Yes, let's
But yeah, so I've done different things since then. Worked at big and small companies. I was at Microsoft for more than a decade. Built a B2B application now called Microsoft Teams. Earlier it was Microsoft Link and other names before that. Then moved into consumer side with eBay, with Amazon, and most recently with Postmates here in San Francisco. I was their VP of engineering. And then I wanted to start something of my own, so started Productiv, a B2B. So I've done a little bit of B2B, well, a lot of B2B, then a lot of B2C, and then back to B2B. But that's really what I've done.
Thank you, Ashish. And in fact, I think from my perspective, I think that is what we will cover, and that is what I like, because the B2B and B2C, if you look at the world, people think of it as very different when it comes to user onboarding, authentication. But I think as we are learning, we feel there are common themes, at least common aspects of it. So I think the first question I have for you, Ashish, as you went through your career in different places, what were the trends in terms of user onboarding, your learnings and comparison between B2C and B2B companies?
As far as user onboarding,
as far as user onboarding, yes.
Right. So, look, it's a very loaded question. I mean, I can spend an hour just talking about this, but let me simplify it down, rephrase the question. So let me simplify user onboarding to just user authentication, right? Okay. Like somebody's trying to say who you are, right? Username, password is how we typically think about it. And now in that sense, sure, it has to be secure. That part is the common part, right? I mean, you have to say who you are, both in B2B or in B2C. The difference just in that thing is really how complex and how friction-free you need to be. And you are allowed to be in B2B versus B2C. In B2C, it's almost a given, or it's a need really, that you won't even ask anybody to register, right? Don't even ask them for a password before you have shown some value to them. You have to, like in a typical e-commerce example, you have to search for whatever you want. add it to your shopping cart. Once you go to checkout, then we'll say, hey, look, we want to create an account. Maybe even then we won't say it. You have to show value, and you have to minimize that friction. It should be like that for them to say, okay, fine, yes, I have an account with you, because that's the expectation for many reasons. We can get into that. In B2B, it's almost the opposite, right? The first thing that users expect, businesses expect, whether they are small businesses or large businesses, they expect is like, wait, authenticate me before you do anything with me. Like, don't show me any value, don't show me any data. Then I don't know who else you're showing this information to. And they expect a certain amount of complexity, right? They say, look, don't just let me choose a password of, hello 123. Well, if you do that, then I don't really know how secure you really are, right? Do you offer MFA and whatnot, multi-factor auth? So B2B and B2C, they start with the same, I guess, same requirements, saying, hey, we need to authenticate this person, whoever is coming in. The way I if I expand upon going beyond user authentication, the way I think of this is this, that in B2C, typically, when you think of a user, you're just thinking of the user on their own. They are an entity on their own. Now, recently, there have been, okay, fine, you think of them as a group, family, and whatnot. But typically, you say, this is one person on their own. And in B2B, you have to think of this person as part of a team, part of an organization, because they typically are. Now, this also varies, if you're small business versus large businesses, your requirements might vary. But if I take the median case, right, B2C is all about reduce the number of clicks, right? Every click will cost you conversion.
So that's actually interesting, Ashish. I think we've heard, and as we talk to potential customers and our design partners, we are hearing the same thing, which is it's reduce the user friction on B2C side. One of the interesting trend, or one of the interesting question that always comes up is not the first time only. You're mentioning the first time. I would love to hear your thoughts. Postmates, right? I mean, one of the interesting thing which we heard from a retailer was pretty much any online business loses money on the first purchase.
Mm-hmm.
You only make money after the second if you're a really well-run shop, or even the third if you're an average shop. Tell us more the friction side of the repeat, right? Like the journey, the onboarding, the repeat. How did you guys think about that at Postmates? What was the learnings on user onboarding, repeat visits?
Correct. So when we think of the first thing we have to really nail down is, why would a user even give us that time of the day to say, look, I will create an account with you to even do the user authentication the first time. Why won't I just use guest checkout and be done with it, right? In fact, if you don't have guest checkout, your conversion will drop. So user authentication by itself as a problem is not a given, right? In fact, most people say, I want an opt out of this, right? Now, what value do you provide for me to go through the motions, even if it's very less friction? What value do you provide so that I create an account? And then when I come back, I remember to, I take the time to log into my account that I created. Maybe I forgot the password. Maybe I didn't. Maybe this or that, right? So that part is important. We should not forget that if you are just saying, hey, look, you create the account because my marketing team needs it, then the consumer is less likely to go through those motions. Now, so that's one part that we offered, at Postmates or even in eBay, saying, look, here is the value that we'll save some data for you. It'll be easier the next time you order. We'll make recommendations for you, blah blah blah. Right? And that's where it gets interesting, saying, when they come back, first of all, how easy was the sign up? But as you're saying, when they come back, and we do want them to come back the second, the third, the fourth time, is it seamless? Is it secure but seamless? Like, ideally, did we just somehow remember them and say, yeah, you are the same person. Your session is still valid, 14 days later. Now in B2B, you're like, dude, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah, 40
right?
days is a long time in the B2B.
That session expired a long time ago. Right? In B2C, sometimes you say, unless you're a bank, right? Once you log in, you are logged in until you log out, right? Does my entity or does my identity transfer across devices?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
While I am on a laptop and I'm logged in and I'm doing something now, when I go to my mobile device, because I don't know, I need to take a picture to upload it to your app or what have you, or I'm just walking away and I'll complete the order, in Postmates time, okay, fine, I'll complete the food order, as I'm walking out of the office. Well, what do I do now, right? Do I say, hey, look, yeah, your order was kind of there, maybe not there, but now here you start fresh and start by entering your password and I don't know anything about you. So a lot of these things
come in for the repeat. Interesting. So
right.
So I think picking continuing on the trend, right? So it's very interesting how continuing the identity of the user across devices. But I think the same holds, and I'll probably ask you a question about your experience at the eBay and the Microsoft times, which is, what is user identity? Is this a new user? Like when you're building a new app, is this a new user? Are there central identity, but do you register with each app? How do you think about in a large company context of the user identity continuity? Is the data different? Tell us more, like how was that world different than the Postmates, which is a single app?
Yep. It's actually very, very interesting you say that, because when I was saying like you are part of the team, right? You are part of not just a team in B2B application. You're part of a ecosystem of applications that I am, as a new application, I'm supposed to know you, right? The expectation is, don't ask me all the information that you are supposed to know, because all these other applications know about me. Like, fine, you can ask me to log in, but why can't you connect to my SSO systems? Why can't you connect to my Active Directory or Azure Directory now? Why do I need to tell you that I work in the sales team? Why don't you already know about it? Right? I'm not going to fill out a form of my life history, right? Because you want me to register. In fact, I don't want to register. In B2C, it's almost the opposite, right? The expectation of a consumer is, you should not know anything about me, right? If
I'm visiting,
right, if I go to Postmates.com and says, well, we kind of know you live in Palo Alto, I'm like, wait a second, how are you spying on me, right? Versus if in a B2B application, I say, okay, a new user, the most seamless experience is I already know almost everything about them in an authorized way from all the systems that I'm supposed to connect. That is the expectation.
Very interesting, though. So it's very interesting. You said the B2B, the first time you come in, you put a gate, which is authentication gate, because they expect you to be secure. But once you are in, the expectation of the user is to know everything about me because you know these systems, which is flipped on the B2C side, which is when you're coming in, you want to give most of the value and show everything. But once you log in, they're going to start to question, how do you know about this? How do you know about this? So interesting contrasting things there.
Let me pull another thread. This is, you are asking about not just identity, but what do you do with the identity, right? Remember we started by saying, look, we'll reduce user onboarding to just authentication, right? But really, there are multiple pieces of it, right? And all relate to that identity, right? Authentication is, okay, who you are. Then there is authorization, as we know about, right? What are you allowed to do in the system? Now in B2C, that concept mostly doesn't make sense, because a user is just an entity by themselves. I mean, you can't say, well, you are the admin, but somebody else will be the power user, and somebody, right? The user is the user. But in B2B, you are expected to know that, hey, there is role-based access control. There is different levels of license tiers. There's different levels of permissions, and so on and so forth. And even the thing that we were just talking about, who you are beyond authorization and authentication. Can I personalize the experience for you? Now, personalization exists in both words, right? In B2C also, in B2B also. In B2C, they might say, wait a second, how did you know XYZ to personalize this for me? Like, how did you know that I wanted to buy this dress from Macy's and you're showing me an ad for that when I'm ordering a pizza here? What the hell is going on? But in B2B, right, that personalization is not in terms of ads, but in terms of what part of your functionality application are you supposed to expose to? How do you make my life easier? Because after all, I'm a business user. I'm paying you for it, probably.
So yeah, I think let's dig a little deeper. We spend a lot of time on B2C, but good thread on the B2B and authorization. And since your current Productiv, right, and maybe learnings from here or your experience in B2B, one of the things that we commonly hear is the B2B authorization experience levels are back. These aspects, people build it much later in the cycle. SAML, they build it much later in the cycle. I think this is really looking for your learnings, which is, are there benefits to build it earlier in the cycle? When should you decide? How should you decide when to build? Um, Again, mostly trying to hear, because there's always a trade-off, right? Work, priorities. But how did you guys go through about this decision making? When do you add your SAML, RBAC, level of RBAC, granularity of this is like a bottomless pit. You can continue to develop for months to years.
Yeah. So see, look, the answer is on day one, but here's the challenge, right? On day one, you are like, I have my core features, the widget that I'm trying to build, right? After all, I'm right. Usually a B2B company is not saying, hey, the key value we provide is that we have very rich user onboarding experience. That is right. So, but as soon as you start talking to, even serious mid-market customers, SMBs maybe let you pass. Maybe even some mid-market customers will let you pass, saying, okay, fine, you are some new startup. I'll give you some room for you to figure it out. But all your serious buyers, businesses, will say, hey, look, it's not sufficient that you ask me for a username and password. Where is the SAML integration? Where is the SCIM integration? Not just the SAML integration. Where is the RBAC? And not just, okay, fine, 3 profiles. I need a rich RBAC functionality. I need auditing functionality. And so the part that we traded off in the beginning, we said, look, we are not going to build it all ourselves, but we need it if we are going to be taken seriously in the market. Okay. So the ideal, and we went through some hops to find it. The ideal was, look, somebody else has done 80-90% of the work, and it's provided as a service, right? Or some APIs or what have you that we can just hook into. And I don't need to know the details of SAML and whatnot. They say, look, you want to integrate with your customer's SSO? It's fine. Makes sense. It'll be there, right? So that is kind of the ideal that I would say to. But I don't think it's valuable to say, I won't think about this as an advice to say, look, just worry about your core product. And, 2 years later, you can slap on.
Yeah, that's actually.
You and I both know it cannot be done. You cannot slap on RBAC later on. Your developers will say, look, dude, this whole thing is either all or nothing. Right?
One of the interesting thing you mentioned, which is very interesting, is role for personalized experience. So I want to dig deeper, because it's interesting. Like, I always thought, most of the, at least we have discussed internally, is role is to control what a user can do. But you bring up a good point, which is, if you can discover the user's role, figure out the right role, and personalize the experience, that could be powerful. Like, talk to me, like, when you say personalization, is it the dashboard, is the data? And that comes back to onboarding, I guess, full circle.
Absolutely.
RBAC for onboarding.
Yeah, so it's not access control, because but it's more experience. I want to take Productiv example.
Please.
Maybe see if I can do something else. But let's say Productiv, right?
Yeah.
So Productiv is a tool to to help CIOs manage their software portfolio, right? Software management platform. And so we have a lot of data that we collect from all the systems. Say, okay, what applications do you have? What are you spending on it? Which ones are SOC 2 compliant? Which one are connected to SAML and so on and so forth, right? All the things about that, who's using what features of what application. With so much data, right? If a CIO is coming to our tool and we say, look, Here's all the data, and you can write a SQL query and get what you want. Guess what that CIO is going to do? She's going to log out the very minute and probably cancel our contract, saying you guys have no bloody idea what to do, right? But to a data analyst, right, that's the thing they want. For a security person who comes into our product, they are probably looking for recommendations of where are the security, what percentage of my applications are not behind SSO, which ones are those. Financial a CFO coming in or a finance person coming in wants a very different thing, saying, okay, where are the opportunities for me to do spend reduction? So many different ways of using a SaaS application, a B2B SaaS application, and it's true in many applications. It's not just unique to Productiv that we can serve multiple personas. I think many SaaS applications, most applications, I would say, serve multiple personas. And so the quicker you can get
the value to that persona, the faster it is.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Let's actually, on the quicker value, there's another thread, the common buzz these days, PLG.
Yes.
Right. There's enough talk, PLG, onboarding, how do you get the user, PLG, product-led growth, to define it. I am sure everybody knows, but still, would love to hear your thoughts. I think one, how does user onboarding change in the PLG world? What should we think about if you're building a brand new SaaS app which you want to be PLG? What should we keep in mind for user onboarding?
Yeah, PLG is very interesting, right? Because we hear about consumerization of business applications, and PLG is an example of saying, look, if your application can stand on its own and attract a single user one at a time, right, and show value, that's great, right? As a model for a business. But now remember, I was saying that you can think of a user as one entity versus part of a group. In PLG, when you're doing one user at a time, you're almost like a B2C company, right?
Yeah.
You don't have any contact. You can't really ask this, the salesperson who's logging into your application to say, well, why don't you connect your SSO first? They're like, dude, I don't even know what that you're talking about, right? So you have to think of them as, in some sense, a consumer. But you can't really bring your experience all the way down to saying, hey, let me show all the value and then ask you to log in.
So you cannot let them completely be open system.
Right. Yeah. So you still, you have to do, a merge of the two, right? You say, look, I will provide simple options, but it's still a business application. It'll still be a little bit complex. In fact, I want it to be a little more complex so that when, 5, 7, maybe 50, 70 people, come onto my application, and then finally somebody says, well, let's actually buy an enterprise license for it. The InfoSec person doesn't come in and say, look, these guys are completely junk, man, right? All of you, like half of you have set the password as hello123. I'm not going to buy this application. In fact, let's offboard this application. So you still have to remember that PLG or not, there's a certain expectation that you still have to meet for security, for privacy when you are on.
So that actually makes it life very hard, because you're saying, hey, you need to ease the onboarding because that's an individual user, but still meet the security criteria when that individual user turns into a company at some state.
You have to at least build that credibility that you are decent enough. Like, you may not enforce MFA, multi-factor, but you have to say, look, there's an option. There's an option for you to connect to SSO, but we don't offer it in this free trial version or this one user version. But there is that option that we offer when your IT person comes in tomorrow to say, okay, fine, let's buy 1,000 licenses for it, right? Yeah. You can't really say, well, we are PLG, we don't offer SSO integration. Thank you very much. We're not going to buy you, right?
So very interesting. I think looking at time, Ashish, I want to switch gears a little bit and then maybe take some questions. I think we've talked, how do you decide user onboarding, B2C versus B2B, but you have led engineering teams, product teams, large teams across. One of the questions I always wonder, and again, I'm a believer that usually it's not only about that capability, that feature, but about the team. Which team is on the table when you're making user onboarding decisions? How do you, like in a startup, in a big company, what's the decision process? Who's on the table? Who do you need to get the buy-in? Tell us more about those experiences if there's anecdotes.
Yeah, absolutely. See, I'll tell you the mistake we sometimes get into, and I almost got into there, learned the hard way, is that, look, this user authentication, hashing the passwords, storing them, salting them, or whatever, integration with SAML. This is all very deep technology, call some APIs, blah, blah, blah thing. Let's just the engineering team handle it. I mean, ultimately, yes, engineering team does have to implement it. But the whole user onboarding, I think, hopefully, I was able to convey it, that it is much more. It's way more important than saying, hey, look, we mash the hash of this to that, and then the person is who they say they are. It is about designing that very thoughtful experience. How do we say that the number of clicks will be minimum in case of a B2C?
Interesting. Yeah.
How do we say, at which point do we offer this option of saying, by the way, if you create an account, this is the value you will get, right? If you ask an engineer, they'll probably not design it very well. So this is a whole team, right? The same team which is designing your main features, your product management team, your product design team, and your engineering team need to sit at the table and say, look, this whole experience actually will matter to our revenue. In B2C, how much will the user will convert? When they come back, will we know about them? Will the experience be easier? They will buy more. They'll come more often. And in B2B, again, would this be secure? Would we be GDPR compliant? Would meet XYZ criteria? And this cannot be done in isolation. This has to be a
so it has
team
to be
effort.
Product management, design, and engineering.
Absolutely. There is no other option here.
Very good. I mean, I think this was amazing, Ashish. We're almost at time. I think the key takeaways, I think clearly both B2C, B2B, user onboarding is critical, but critical in different ways is what I heard. Different considerations. Anything we missed? I would love to hear your closing thoughts. I mean, I think from my perspective and what I'm hearing and what we are hearing from some of the other conversations we are having is, I think this is one of those things where when you start building a brand new app, you don't want to spend time, as you said, you want to move on quickly enough because that is not your core business. But at the same time, if you don't pay the right amount of attention in the beginning, then it's very hard to fix later, is what I heard.
Absolutely. So you have to do it. You should think about it from day one. And I think the industry is maturing, and we have talked about Descope and whatnot also in this context. There are some solutions which offer it at at a very high cost of money. Some solutions which offer it at a very high cost of labor, right? There's some APIs, but you have to still spend engineering cycles on it. And unfortunately, the reality is that because there is no real perfect solution today, sometimes the problem is just slapped on later, and then it's not really the solution you wanted for security, for privacy, or for authorization, authentication. So if anything, my closing thoughts is that I'm glad I'm talking to you. I'm hoping that I can influence an industry leader into solving the problem for us.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Questions? Anybody in the room, guys?
So you mentioned a couple of times, passwords and password complexity, and as you probably know, we took a hard stance here. And so, what are your thoughts around passwordless, authentication? Is it good enough for enterprises? Is it good enough for consumers? And friction.
Look, if it can be solved, I think the world will owe a giant thank you to whoever solves this problem properly. I don't remember the exact metric, but I think somebody told me that about 40% of IT tickets even today are about I forgot my password. That's a huge waste for everybody, right? In B2C also. Let me not say the name to protect, because I did work at multiple B2B and B2C companies, but that was true. A lot of our tickets in a B2C environment were, hey, we forgot our password. We're like, dude, there's a forgot password link right there. But, so solving the passwordless problem, I I think it's an excellent goal. It just, the solution has to be, again, meeting those criteria and the bars of that required by B2B and B2C. Like, for example, WhatsApp solve this problem of passwordless. There's no WhatsApp password, right? My phone number is also not the password. It's just your identity. And I personally believe that was a huge factor in the success of WhatsApp, in saying, look, this whole problem of authentication. You are authenticated, but there is no password. There is not even an SMS. So if somebody tries to solve the problem and says, look, the whole one-time password sent to your SMS, any B2B customer should tell you immediately, like, this is not going to be a solution that's acceptable to us, because SMS has been proven not to be secure. So I don't know what is the solution. You guys will come up with it, but I know that the problem is really, really interesting to solve, to get rid of passwords and still keep the security and the ease of use.
So I guess I have a follow-up question on that. Obviously, we have today the two-factor authentication and the single sign-on. And what do you see the real reason that organizations don't really eliminate the password today and just moving to single sign-on and two-factor authentication?
So unless I'm missing something, even the single sign-on, the first factor is the password, right?
Yeah.
So the second factor can be whatever, right? Your Google Authenticator code or what have you, right? A push sent to your mobile phone. But the first factor is the password. I think what he was saying was he'll eliminate the first factor also. So why do organizations not get rid of passwords today? Because we can't. What do we do for the first factor?
Okay.
At least I don't know of any solution.
True. I think it's in the interest of discussion here, right? I think it's very clear, and I don't think we have a good answer, that it's not that you get rid of all passwords. I think the question is, and I hope this happens in 5 to 7 years and be a part of that, which is every individual will have a handful of passwords, less than 3 or 5, which is one where you work, which is your Okta or your Active Directory, whatever your core password is. One for your primary email provider, which is your fundamental, choose your email, Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, Microsoft Live, whatever. And then the third, which I don't know if it is a password, but a way which is the phone number, your SMS is owned by you. Because I believe between the phone, the email, and your corporate identity, those are your 3 identities, which one of 3 could be used along with the second factor of biometric, right? In the right combination here, that could identify a user completely. Now, of course, there are a lot of challenges of education, compliance, everybody agreeing to that. But I think that's the path we are on.
So it's very interesting that you said that. See, look, I mean, we took WhatsApp as an example, which is, this is not 2-factor. The first factor is like 0 factor in some sense, right? There is no password. There is no biometric. There's no nothing. There's just WhatsApp, right? And you are authenticated in some sense. But if you take iPhone as another example, a consumer device, even that first factor is not your password anymore. Yes, it's a personal device, personal identity, but biometric by itself is sufficient as the only factor, right? And the second factor is physical ownership of the device, right? So there is 2 factor in that sense. So I don't know where the word will go to. Maybe it'll go to only 3 passwords, but actually my hope is a little bit, or my ask is a little bit higher than that, saying no, it's not 3 passwords. Let's go to 0.
0 passwords. All right.
So Ashish, I have a question. You have worked in major, bigger companies which already have a lot of software that has already been implemented, right? So it's always easier, I mean, intuitively, that you can implement some of this modern authentication technology. But what would be the motivation that you will say for an organization, let's say it's just 4 years into development, already has built an authentication and should implement simplify their authentication? But how will you as a head of engineering will motivate your team to actually go ahead and implement that? What's in it for them to do that?
That's it. It's I think we were saying this earlier, but it is good business to reduce friction. whether it's B2B or B2C, it is good business to reduce friction. Let's say I'm a B2C company, right? And I'm saying, look, we have spent 4 years in building all sorts of beautiful, friction-free or less friction, low friction authentication mechanisms. Maybe we offer two-factor auth or no, but we have something, right? But then you show me WhatsApp, and maybe WhatsApp is not that example. I don't know the details of it, but you show me another application, my competitor, which says there is no password. I recognize my users properly when they come back. I don't make a mistake. I don't mistake you for you. I don't mix your orders. But nobody has to ever type a password. Their business, I guarantee you, will grow faster, all other things being equal. So there is a business reason to simplify user onboarding as a whole, the whole three pieces of it, in B2B and in B2C. So that's your answer. Engineers, by the way, do things, we are simple folks. You are no longer an engineer, I think. All right, fine.
I'll follow up. So wouldn't there be a trust factor, right? Because there's a human element involved. People feel secure with that's the security aspect, right? And anything which is as drastic as, hey, 0 passwords, believe me, I'm going to take care of you, right? Like that's the marketing pitch. But there's a trust factor, which is a human element, which takes a long time.
Let me ask this question with a question. Hopefully it's an answer. If you ask me today, do I trust that my WhatsApp is not being read by anybody else, or my password protective, I don't know, my Yahoo Mail account or Hotmail account or what have you, right? I'll tell you that there is a very good chance that somebody is reading my email, right? But there's a very, very low chance that apart from Zuckerberg himself, somebody else is reading my WhatsApp messages, right?
You're sure about Twitter anyways now.
We're sure about Twitter, we know, right? So, I think there has been enough done in the market to prove that consumers or humans are willing to trust technology. I mean, Face ID, when it came in, a lot of us were, oh, come on, somebody can show it my photograph, somebody can show it, some other thing, maybe I'm sleeping, blah, blah, blah. And then, we have all accepted it's very secure.
Yeah, but I think that's actually, that is an excellent question. And I think it did take a while. I think the question is, I feel, and maybe it's the optimist in me, which is there are enough examples which have established Face ID or equivalent biometrics and OTP as your core things.
Correct.
There's the other side, which I think if I look at the larger population, probably not us builders, who don't even realize that you missed a password. So I was talking to a friend of mine. He's at a very, very big financial in India. And his point was, like, an average user, and probably my mom, when she downloads an app, she doesn't realize that there is no password. She gets an OTP. OTP is automatically read, auto-filled in the app logs them in, and she just starts to work. So you didn't realize, so unless now somebody says don't trust it, which, by the way, there is a whole sort of message that was, and that is how, by the way, WhatsApp began, right? WhatsApp's bigger adoption was India. Like if you look at when they were acquired, like almost 60% or 65% of the user base was in India.
They're using it for businesses.
And now it's going business route, which is because nobody expected a password. They didn't worry about it. And then they actually did, by the way, to your point on the who's reading the messages, they had a big campaign I was reading, which is encrypted end to end.
Yeah.
Correct.
They marketed the heck out of it. We don't even realize, like, a ton of marketing, which was the point, which is to build that trust.
Correct.
I think there is a human and trust factor for sure, though. Yes.
I wanted to come back to that same question about engineer. You now, and you gave a great answer about the business motivation. And we were talking about the individual engineers. You have an engineering team which has built that entire great authentication stack. Now you're asking them to kind of deassemble that, make it simplified. What is the motivation that you will give to them as an individual engineers to kind of
do we want to maintain something that is not necessary? So we're going to get shit from both sides, and I don't know if you can use this on YouTube now, but we're going to get, like, as an engineering team, if I tell them option number 1, right, we keep working on what you have, and there's no lack of work here, right? I mean, we'll have to keep fixing it. We'll have to, keep enhancing it. And by the way, our go-to-market team will keep telling us that we are behind on technology, our competitors are killing us, and our stock value is not as much as it could be. Or option two, right? Let's spend a couple of months, untangle all of this, connect to this new system, which allows us to be, passwordless or some newfangled thing. And by the way, everybody will be happy. We will be happy. We can save 2 engineers and we can work on that tech backlog that we were supposed to work on. I think most engineers, apart from that person who personally wrote the code, night, even he or she will be like, you know what? It's fine. It's done. Let's move on to the next thing.
I already got my promotion.
Yeah, exactly for that.
Wouldn't people want to reduce one tech debt, as you mentioned? And the second is to, from a business and product perspective, you want to reduce friction. I mean, like you have to continuously evolve and adopt technology, because otherwise you will be left behind, whereas the rest of the world moves forward.
Yep. So actually, I was saying this earlier. Engineers are, in that sense, simple folks, right? If you say to us, look, here is the business value that we want, and we think here is a path to it. Can you deliver it? I haven't met an engineering team who says, nah, let's not deliver that value. They'll be like, wait a second, give us 2 days. And they'll be like, actually, it took more than 2 days, but give us 2 more weeks, but we'll be there, right?
There's a point of product manager asked.
Yes, and then it gets all, it goes haywire.
But I get it. Thank you.
Sorry, I think she was asking something first and then.
No,
Go ahead.
I guess my question is, don't you think that once you solve this problem, you actually create a different problem in the privacy world? Because organizations will need to take responsibility on the identity that you create for individuals. You mentioned biometric, like that's a big issue for companies now to handle when they're basically resolving the password but creating a whole different problem.
That is absolutely true. And that's why I was saying that I don't know of a solution today that meets all the needs, right? Like enterprises probably don't, I don't know why exactly, but we don't use like Face ID for user authentication in our internal systems across the board, because there might be, compliance reasons around it. So I'm not saying biometric is the solution, but a passwordless system, if we are really going into that direction, which is compliant. I mean, that's the challenge, right? That's the problem, and I don't know the solution to it. There are much smarter minds here. But the problem is you are right. You're defining the problem, saying, hey, look, it has to be as low friction as possible, hopefully passwordless. It has to meet all the security bars of saying, look, you cannot hack into it. Two-factor auth. Two-factor auth is again a solution to say, look, it's harder to break the system. Could be another way to do it. It has to be compliant. You're not the compliant with privacy regulations of different countries and different regions. Can somebody build a solution like that? I think in the consumer world we have seen something established, but in the business world we still need to.
So I think again this is not the topic. So there's an emerging standard, WebAuthn. One second, Manish. Which is FIDO is the organization.
Yep.
I think it is Merck, right? There's a very large pharmaceutical. I think it's Merck, which basically adopted. Their claim is for their internal apps, they have gone completely passwordless. Not even the first password, not even the first factor. Again, we'll not go into the detail. There are some emerging standards which basically tie the biometric, keep the biometric with the user, but still use a combination of that and private key.
Don't forget, when you do biometric, you don't send the biometric. So I don't have your biometric. It's all on the device. It just unlocks the private key that allows you to kind of sign some message.
That is correct.
Manish, you had a question?
No, I was going from a very, very layman perspective. I've led IT organization in grounded companies like, let's say, Yum Brands, Pizza Hut, KFC, thousands of restaurant managers, hospitals, and Whirlpool, right? So factory workers and salespeople on the field. And I can't imagine them going passwordless for their remote logins and things like that. Very competitive market out there for all these businesses. So I can't imagine like a Pizza Hut restaurant manager, he'll be happy. he or she will be happy. We will have a passwordless situation in the restaurant. But then I'll be scared as an organization leader and my CEO and CFO. So I'm just thinking from a contract, how will it change our contracts with the employee and maybe the regulatory bodies, etc. Is what I was thinking just now.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open question. Look, I don't know the answer.
I don't think.
So I'm saying Merck has done something which I'm wondering how did they do it.
No, so actually that's very interesting. I spent most of the talk saying, look, we don't have a passwordless solution in enterprise because again, this is an area that I didn't want to dive into. But tell you the truth, my CEO heard me, he will like beat me over the head saying, Ashish, we have been talking about this FIDO thing. Don't you remember? We are trying out pockets of this passwordless thing even in Productiv. So there are solutions emerging. And the beauty of this thing is you're right. It's hard for us to imagine today. How would I, trust, whatever, 100,000 people on the factory floor, going around passwordless authentication. But that's the part that's the onus is on the technology providers to say, look, it is better technology in terms of security, in terms of privacy. It meets all the things, will convince you, and it's simpler to use.
Anything happens, the CFO is going to grab the CIO's phone.
That is true.
I think
And
it's
so
the
the
same,
CIO
I
still,
agree.
the CIO still says, look, my requirement is still that it has to be secure and it has to be auditable, right? If you don't meet, n number of requirements, I'm not going to adopt this technology. So you are within your rights to say that. And what I'm saying is that the challenge is for the industry to step up and say, we will provide a solution which meets all the criteria, right?
By the way, I think it's turning out, I'm hearing this discussion, it's coming like similar debate. And I'm going to do a very drastic analogy. It's like a driverless car or full self-driving car. Same thing to password, because the regulatory, the insurance, the risk, that is the biggest factor. I think the technology will be much closer in 5 years, but all those.
To the vertical,
Yeah.
like, for example, adopting a passwordless organization, there will be people who would adopt it right away, and then there will be laggards who would adopt it much later. And I think that duration is going to be many years. And that's how
technologies
work out.
These are
I will say this, that I think this is to your point about WhatsApp in India. Some of this, like the same folks who are running in restaurants, are actually passwordless in most of the restaurants in India because they have been trained through the OTP. When they have to log into their machine, they get a code on their phone which they just enter. And it's the same thing. It's still they're getting on a personal device. They don't have to remember in their mind. They just get a device and they get it.
There could be a badge, there could be an identifier. There's a lot of ways that.
Market, though, right? Like they're a highly digital, mobile first country where OTP is like their number one access or authentication methodology.
Yeah.
US is nowhere. I mean, we don't get OTPs on a daily basis.
So let's bring that
India is very
technology here.
different. So I had one more question. This more broader, right? You talked about user onboarding. You have worked in so many different types of companies, types of organizations, B2B, B2C. Do you see a market for standardizing user onboarding? For example, you talked about frictionless, seamless. People are still struggling, right? I mean, people are still struggling to say, hey, what does seamless mean? What does simple mean? And people have different processes or methodologies to go about addressing that challenge. Do you see a market to standardize or templatize the user onboarding? And authentication is just one piece of it, right? Because you talked about RBAC, you talked about the bottomless pit of features that one could implement, but every organization could have a crawl, walk, run approach, and people take different approaches, maturity model. Do you see a market to standardize or create templates to say, hey, these are best practices, this is how we do it, and across industries, across verticals? What are your thoughts there?
I definitely think so, right? I mean, it's not a question of whether it's 100-0 or not, right? But a few years ago, we could not have imagined an auth 0, right? It wasn't there. A Cognito wasn't there. But now there is auth 0, on the higher end price point scale, full a better service, very easy to implement but high price. And Cognito, which is far cheaper, you have to still have put put effort in it, human effort in it, but dollar-wise or cheaper. But these are standardizing in some sense how user authentication, that first piece, works. And then, obviously the Okta integrations and the SAML standards and whatnot. I think they have shown us that while, in the wild west, everybody used to say, well, username password we'll implement on our own. We will store it in our own database, our own hashing mechanism, our own sorting mechanism, blah, 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 right? And now people are like, actually, you know what? Why do we need to redo this thing? In fact, it's better that we don't do it because we'll probably get it wrong, right? This is a solved problem. These guys, it's their job to solve it. Like Cognito knows how to do this. Auth0 knows how to do this. Okta knows how to do this. They must have done this really well. We can't replicate it with 2 engineers in 3 weeks, right? I think authorization as the next pillar, my guess and my prediction is it will go the same way. There's nothing magical about authorization, from the simple thing of saying, are you an admin or are you, a power user or user, to the very detailed RBAC of, what's the role and what's the group and what are the different types of permissions and whatnot you get. Yes, it won't be as simple as I'm making out to be. It's a more complex problem. The solution might be a little bit more complex, different templates, whatnot. But I think it'll happen. It'll happen that a lot of new companies or new software that's being written, they will ask. We will spend 3 months and 5 engineers and we'll get it wrong, right? And we'll constantly chase this problem. Instead of that, why don't we use, this block that is available on the shelf? Building blocks. Once you build them, once somebody uses them, it becomes a competitive advantage for you to use them. Otherwise, your competitor will do this and you will lose. So adoption will happen. I again think of myself as a guy who's calling out to the industry saying, solve the problem, right? Give us the building block. Adoption is not going to be an issue.
Very interesting. I think it's funny. There's a lot of discussion. Every software problem can be solved with another layer of abstraction. This is that layer of abstraction that you want to provide. Very good, guys. I know we're close to time. One more question, and then we'll wrap up at least this part of the Fireside chat. Vikram?
So you were talking about standardization rather than the whole process of
Correct. And the entire user onboarding, right? Rather than, yes, we have these pieces and building blocks, the entire process, best practices, because
Correct.
As companies are starting up, and going back to what you said, people may not adopt it on day one, but as and when they scale, then they find the need to adopt it. At which point in time, they want something out of the box.
Yes.
Like, hey, this is how, and I agree with the product design and engineering piece of it, but if that entire process or journey can be simplified and said, hey, you are this type of customer profile, this is what best suits for you, these are our recommendations, and hey, these are all the building blocks, best of breed or one-stop shop, whatever, right? And then this is how you go about doing it. That was more, I mean, is there a market for that, where now we're trying to put in the pieces of...
Look, there are different pieces. The markets are being shown. Like even the third piece to complete that, right? I mean, authorization is the second piece in my mind. There's a third piece and maybe the fourth and fifth pieces. But the third piece was, look, how do I personalize the experience of the user in B2B context? How do I walk them through the product? Depends upon, if they're first time user or they're a different persona. And then companies like Pendo are showing that, yes, there is a market for this problem. Companies want to do this not on their own and saying their own engineers, kind of figure out, the walkthrough of the product. Pendo is saying, look, we'll standardize it. Well, at least we'll provide the building block and then you can customize it for your own customers. So I think the indications are always there. You build the right building block, there are people who will use it.
Go ahead. Sorry, I hijacked your question.
No, so I was just saying, so the idea of standardization, which I think would be a great problem to solve if this whole, the whole PLG is what we are talking about, could be standardized and basically a more elegant solution for all the systems would come out.
Yeah.
So that would be a great problem to solve.
Absolutely. Like standardization probably to me is a loaded word. It gets into regulation and standards and whatnot. I was not saying we go there right off the bat.
But at least build the building blocks so that you can stitch the whole thing.
Yeah. Somebody will create an Okta and a one login, and then maybe a SAML standard will appear. I don't know if it happened in that order, or whether SAML came first or Okta came first. I don't remember.
That's actually a good question. SAML came first.
Or in this case, the standard came first.
But very good, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Ashish. Very insightful. Also, good questions. But I appreciate your time. We'll probably keep this series of meetups live, bring in more speakers. But thank you so much, of course, for all the experience.
Thank you for having me
today.
Thank you,
Absolutely,
guys.
Thank you so much.